Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I am so pleased you are here, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I know you could be doing lots of other things with your time, so I'm grateful for you. And please do let me know if there's anything specific you'd like to hear on the podcast, if there are any guests that you would like to listen to, and I will do my best to answer those and to make sure the podcast is serving you in the way that I hope it is. So I hope you've had a good week. This week for me has been good. It's been nice to see some sunshine, to be honest, and to have slightly better weather here in the UK, and to actually start seeing the blossom trees and it feeling a little bit more like spring. So it definitely feels like a new season, a bit of new beginnings. I hope it feels a bit like that for you as well. As we are on the 21st of March, I think it's a good time to think about what the next quarter could look like and the next season and how to enjoy spring. As you know, I have a number of events that are coming up, and I have just revamped my website. So I'd encourage you to head to thrivealcoholfree.com if you would like to find out more and get some free resources, as well as find out what I do as a coach and see what's going on. And so I would love to meet you if you are thinking that you maybe want to take a break, or you don't know where to start, or you're just curious and you want to have a conversation, then feel free to set up a clarity call with me and I'd love to talk to you. Okay, so today I speak to Arlina Allen, and it's a very vulnerable conversation. She's very vulnerable, which I appreciate, but really interesting conversation in terms of where she is. So Arlina Allen is a certified recovery coach, a certified hypnotist, and the founder of Sober Life School. She's also the host of the award-winning recovery podcast, the One Day at a Time podcast, which has been going since June 2016. She's been sober since April 1994, which is why I say it's quite a different perspective. So that's nearly 30 years ago, the 23rd of April 1994. So it'll be interesting for you to hear, 30 years sober and her journey. And so she's been happily married for 25 years. She's the mother of two amazing young adult men and the mum to Teddy, the family English bulldog. And so I hope you enjoy the conversation. There may be some things that might be a little bit triggering, but I would just want to warn you up front. But I do hope you enjoy the conversation with Arlina. And so here it is. Hi, Arlina. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. It's lovely to meet you.
It's so great to be here and to meet you. We were just chit-chatting and I got to learn a little bit more about you. I'm super excited that we're doing this.
Yeah, it's really great you're here. So thank you. So for those people that might not have come across you, why don't you give a bit of an intro in terms of how did you get here? And I won't burst your bubble. So why don't you do it? Because it's so interesting.
Yeah, well, we were chatting earlier about how I made the switch from being an account executive in Silicon Valley, doing sales, to doing what I do now, which is sober life school. And so it's sober coaching. I do group coaching. I teach classes on self-esteem, and I have sobriety reset, which is like a 30-day boot camp people can do online on their own. But the whole reason that we're here is because a very long time ago, I was one of those who was physically, mentally addicted to alcohol and drugs. And the way I landed there is sort of everything always starts in childhood, right? Childhood kind of sets the stage for building our identity and installs all of our dysfunction. And so it all begins in childhood. And it sounds very cliche, but there was a couple of things that I'll share that happened to me when I was very young that set the stage for me to make me sort of vulnerable to addiction. And the first one was I was actually sexually abused by a neighbor when I was very young. And then my parents divorced when I was 7. And those two things really damaged my self-esteem, my identity. It sort of rooted this idea that I was somehow bad. And children have no perspective or context because we just don't have any life experience, right? So I developed this idea that it was my fault, that I was broken, that I was bad. And that kind of set the stage. And I didn't have parents who drank or used. They were very like middle class, well adjusted. My father was super religious. My mother was from Mexico City. Dad is from Kentucky. And so I kind of grew up in this biracial house, although nobody ever, I present very fair and whatever. So people didn't think of me as biracial really, but my family did. So it was interesting that when I was with my white side of the family, I was the Mexican one. And when I was with my Mexican family, I was the white one. So we all have like a need to belong, right? And I always had this sense of otherness.
Mm.
So that's how the stage was set. And then I'll tell you, I remember my first drink like it was yesterday. I'm 55 years old, but I had my first drink probably between the ages of 8 and 10. And I'm just guessing because I got my first journal, my first diary when I was 10 years old by my stepdad. So I know it was before that. And my parents divorced when I was about 7. So it was like somewhere in the middle. But what happened was my mom went out to dinner with a friend, and I was left home alone with my older sister. She was the compliant child, right? She did never made any waves, and she did all her homework and got good grades. And I was the opposite. I was the wild child in the family. But I decided one night when my mom went out that I was going to have a drink from the dusty bottle that was in the cabinet. Somebody probably left it from a dinner party or something. I don't really know. But I remember it was a clear bottle and the liquid was brown. And I remember mixing it with juice. And I remember like the anticipation and excitement of doing something kind of naughty was really thrilling. But that first drink, when it touched my lip, like it burned when I touched my lips and it burned all the way down. But then when it hit bottom, I had like this warmth spread through my whole body. And I felt really good. It was as if every negative feeling I had about myself, I didn't really realize it until I felt good, but I was carrying all this self-loathing and really kind of self-hatred at such a young age, but all of that self-consciousness, like all of that stuff, and it was lifted. And the juxtaposition between those two feelings was so intense, it burned into my psyche forever. And it was like something outside of myself is going to relieve me of these feelings that I have. And of course, I wasn't super intellectual about it at 10 years old, 9 years old. And I didn't become a daily drinker then either. But I really did get this idea that I could change how I felt by taking something. There was something outside of myself that I could consume that would change how I felt. And so, really, I didn't have any coping skills either. I had a mom who was working really hard and she was raising 2 girls. My dad was a very good stand up kind of guy. He was paying his child support. I saw him all the time, but it was primarily mom. And she had two primary feelings. She was either really happy or really pissed off. And I felt like she saved her happy face for the outside world. And to give her a little bit of grace as an adult woman with two grown boys, I know what it's like to be tired and have too much to do and have demanding kids. That's how kids are, right? All kids are demanding, and feeling grouchy towards my kids, even when I didn't want to be. But I also have some other tools. Like I know how to say sorry. We say I love you all the time. And we have open communication. But my mom didn't have any coping skills, right? So my primary feelings when I was growing up was guilty and wrong. Those were my primary feelings. And I desperately wanted my mother's approval. So I wanted everybody's approval. Really, my safety came from external validation. I couldn't give it to myself, so I needed to get it from others. And so I became achievement performance based. That's where my self worth came from. And it still plagues me today. I've been sober for a long time. I've been doing therapy for probably 30 years, but that's still how I'm hardwired. That's my default. So I have to be very mindful and practicing self care and all these tools and practices that we do so that we can be conscious and move through the world in a conscious, deliberate way, right? But in terms of drinking, I started really young and I ended when I was 25 years old. I had my last drink of alcohol on my 25th birthday. I continued to smoke weed. What do you call it in the UK? Do you call it weed? what
Yeah,
do you call it?
we call it weed as well.
Maybe
Yeah.
weed, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was smoking non-addictive marijuana for probably 15 years. They say it's not addictive. We know it's more than that. But from the first drink to the last drink, I had a series of what I called episodes. When I would consume alcohol, I would have these explosive reactions to things. It was like I would stuff my feelings. And then when I would consume alcohol, everything let loose. And I had these two primary personalities. I had Wimpy Wendy and Badass Betsy because when I was drinking, I was either fighting or crying because I didn't have any way of like managing my feelings. So I would just stuff them. Right. And it's so interesting because knowing what I know now, I realized that my inability to manage my emotions is what compelled me to drink in the first place.
Mm.
Right. Having all these, like who I thought I was and what I deserved was compelling me to self-soothe, is what I was really trying to do. And I didn't have any healthy coping skills. So by the time I was 25, I was really in a dark place. I was sad. I was lonely. When I was 23, I had a very bad experience with my sister. We got into a physical altercation because I had been drinking. And it was a very humiliating experience. And that's when I started questioning my drinking. So it was the questioning. It took me 2 years. It's like, can I moderate? I think that's a very important question people need to answer for themselves is, can I moderate? And I went through a 2 year process of trying to moderate, trying to figure myself out. It's like, is my drinking problematic? What about all the people that I drink with? Is their drinking problematic? Was I surrounding myself with people that were just like me so that in comparison, I didn't look bad? So there was just a series of questions. One question led to another. And I landed in a place where I came to realize that no, in fact, I could not moderate my drinking. And abstinence was really going to be my only path forward. And I'll tell you that that was a terrifying conclusion to come to because my identity was so wrapped in being the fun party girl. And all my friends drank. And the truth of the matter was my circle was getting smaller because my behavior was, I was one of those who, like, I am one of those people who should not drink. There's something about my brain that just says more. When I start drinking, all I want is more. And I behave badly. I used to sometimes say, I'd wake up the next morning and be like, oh my God, that's not my ceiling. Like, and who are you? I actually had a third alter ego, which was Slutty Susan, but we don't need to talk about her. But now I joke around that the only married man I sleep with is my husband. We appreciate it. Yeah, the values were a little looser back in the day, let's just say. We can laugh about it now, right? I did all kinds of things to fill the void. My tagline is that if it was in a bottle, a bag, or blue jeans, I was doing it. just anything to change the way I feel. Love addiction was also a big part of a big part of my story. Because what's funny is I thought two things I thought were going to save me: a man or money, right? And it turns out that it was love that saved me, but it didn't show up the way I thought it would. Love showed up in the form of women in this 12-step program that I was introduced to. And I was introduced to this 12-step program by these two guys. All my validation came from men, right? I spent a lot of time decorating the outside. I felt like I had nothing to offer women on the inside. Women were competition, really, because I was looking for the knight in shining armor. I probably ran into him a few times, but he was like, no, she's too drunk. No, thank you. Seeing how your prospects improve when you become alcohol free. It's shocking, really. No surprise, honestly. But love, it was love that saved me. And it just came in the form of women. And I was really surprised by that because I did not have good relationships with women. But I found a group of women who really sort of took me in and protected me and gave me some guidelines. And they were like, hey, if you want, you can do these things or not. But if you do them, you will have this transformational experience. And I was really lucky that I found a good group and was super desperate and willing to be different, which was kind of always how I felt. Like I always wanted to be somebody else but me. And what I found out was that through this 12-step process, I found out who I really was. And I learned to love who I really was. I learned that all my alcoholism, addiction, whatever you want to call it, that the word isn't important to me as much as knowing that I was like wounded and hurt and didn't have a way to self-soothe and heal. And so this was a very pragmatic, practical process to let go of the things that no longer serve me and step into the woman that I wanted to be. And so it's been 29 years. This April, at the end of April, it'll be 30 years. I have every confidence that I will be able to reach that milestone, but it's not the amount of time that's important as much as how I feel from a day-to-day basis. My podcast is called the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast because that's really the mantra that I live my life by. It's like just today. How can I be of service today? How can I be kinder to myself today? Right? Brene Brown is famous for saying that empathy is the antidote to shame.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of shame to contend with from way back, right? So, yeah, it's been a really interesting process of doing these healing practices, really. And they're practices because I don't do them perfectly. I don't even think the only thing I'm consistent about is inconsistency. I do the best that I can. And usually from a day-to-day perspective, I'm mostly all right. So, yeah, I should probably stop there and let you ask a question occasionally.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's amazing. 30 years ago, does that feel like a long time, or does it feel like yesterday? Because the way you described it and talked about it, it felt like you were there. It wasn't a lot of people that have been on my show have maybe stopped drinking anywhere between a year and 10 years, but 30 years. And then you're still, obviously, you've got the sober life score, and you're still really passionate about helping people and serving people. And I'm just curious, is it something that you think about every day that it's been 30 years, or is it something that you sort of just get on with your life and that's it?
I would say yes to both of those things. So, in a way, it feels like a very long time ago, but in other ways, it feels like it was yesterday. And there's this new wave of sobriety that I'm seeing that is equal parts really encouraging, but also a little bit scary to me. There's a lot of permissiveness and there's a lot of loose definitions of things. And so it kind of keeps me. And listen, the truth of the matter is, I've been practicing this way of life. Part of the 12 step is to carry this message to people who are suffering.
Mm.
And I got good at helping people out of their suffering. And I've just been obsessed with this idea of what makes people tick? What drives behavior change? And so I've been on this obsessive quest to figure it out. right? And getting sober isn't about, initially, it's about how do you quit? How do you get through those cravings? How do you manage your emotions? How do you let your circle of friends or family know what's going on with you? How do you reckon with, how do you become so honest with yourself that you decide that this is a problem that's significant enough that you want to do something about it? Right? Like, because there is this level of complacency. It's like, oh, I can just live with it. There's this idea of the shifting baseline syndrome. And the idea says that throughout history, people have experienced things like famine and war, but we have to be able to survive those things. And so we come to this idea of a new normal, right? And so that's what happens in people inside people that are drinking, and they start to slide down the spectrum from maybe occasional use to a use disorder to flat out addiction, right? You can become physically, chemically dependent upon alcohol. It can also be a process addiction. So it has this double whammy. When you consume alcohol, it throws this cascade of chemical reactions that raises your baseline of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So you're actually experiencing a higher level of stress, like from a day-to-day basis. So but then we get used to it. We get used to the pain. Like we all have had that friend who's in a dysfunctional relationship, and we all think, why doesn't she get out of it, or why doesn't he get out of it? And the reason is because it becomes, our baseline has shifted to where it becomes normal. Like we get used to it. And so that's the same thing with drinking. And over the 30 years that I've been alcohol free, I've just been on this quest. I've been able to identify what makes somebody get uncomfortable enough that they're willing to do something about it. And when they are ready to do something about it, that's where I step in. I don't typically try to convince somebody that they should drink, because listen, that's a losing battle. And really, when you try to push somebody, what it does is it creates internal resistance, like they'll dig in their heels even more. So I've just been endlessly fascinated. And the truth of the matter is when I'm working one-on-one with somebody, whether it's in a peer support program like 12 step or in a coaching capacity, there's something magical that happens when someone feels safe enough that they can name the thing that they are ashamed of, and they then become relieved of it, right? That's what healing is.
Yeah.
And that is an energetic, that I get higher off of that than anything else. When someone is ready, there's nothing, I don't know, it's just amazing. But they need to feel safe enough. And a lot of times people are working with like trauma or just long-term negative subconscious beliefs that they're not even aware of. People have a lot of pain, and so they dissociate from their pain. And so people, I think, generally have this vague idea that there's something wrong in the background, but they can't put their finger on it. Right. And that is a sign that there is some unresolved, we can call it pain. Trauma is being thrown around pretty loosely. There's like little t trauma that I think addresses what most people experience, like childhood pain, family pain, grief. It doesn't have to be like childhood abuse. It doesn't have to be like witnessing a murder or wartime or stuff like that. People are walking around with unresolved pain. And so our work is to create a safe space so that that pain can arise. Typically arises in the form of tears. I always say make people cry for a living. That's what I do. But tears are pain leaving the body, right? So I never interrupt somebody's pain process. Like this idea, oh, don't cry, or you hand somebody a tissue right when they're crying, it disrupts their release process. I'm very careful about that. It's important to let somebody finish. They say you have to feel it to heal it. These feelings need to process to resolution. And when the tears stop, that's when they're done. When they can breathe again, that's when it's done. So sorry, I went on a tangent. I even forgot what the question was, but that's what keeps me in this space all these years, is that it's, maybe that's what I'm addicted to now, is being present when someone goes through their stuff.
Gosh, there's so much there,
I
Arlina.
know that was a lot
I'm
to dump in one.
no, it's brilliant. The shift in baseline system is so true, isn't it? People just get to the point where they're okay and they think this is the new normal and this is the way
Yeah,
that I should feel. I should feel when I wake up a bit foggy headed, a bit groggy. That's just how I feel. And then I have a coffee and I'm okay. And then it starts again. And and people justify it as well, don't they? That whole shifting
yeah,
baseline. And so that's really interesting. You talked about, and we'll also talk about managing emotions because I think that's a really important
yeah,
topic. So we can maybe go into that a bit more and how actually being able to manage your emotions is easier when you're alcohol free. It's uncomfortable, but you're able to then really go deeper into that process. But the moderation piece that you touched on a bit earlier, I'd like to go back to that because a lot of people think, well, I haven't got an issue, so I'm just going to moderate. I'm just not going to drink on a weekday, and I'll only drink Friday, Saturday night, or I'm not, or whatever it is. I'm only going to have one glass on a Wednesday and two glasses on a Friday, or whatever. There's so much capacity and energy and time that that takes up. But I'd love to get your perspective on moderation because you mentioned that you did two
yeah.
years of
Yeah.
of trying to moderate. And can you describe what that was like? And I think it'd be really interesting for the person listening if they're thinking, well, I'm going to moderate and that's the answer because it's a tricky one.
Listen, if you can moderate, good for you. That was not my experience. And and moderation. So my thing is run the experiment. Do it. Whatever you decide your plan is, if I'm going to drink a glass on Wednesday and a couple drinks Saturday, Friday, Saturday night, whatever, okay, do that. And if you can do it, God bless you. That was not my experience. When we set a plan and we cannot commit to our own plan, that is a sign that you are unable to moderate, right? And the interesting thing is in the US, there's this idea of recommended allowances for things. You're supposed to have so much protein a day and drink so much water, have your body weight in ounces, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you think about alcohol, it's actually poison. I mean, it's ethanol alcohol. It permeates every cell. So it's fat soluble and water soluble,
Mhm.
which means that it gets into every cell of your body. And what's significant about that is even a few glasses of alcohol per week will over time, it actually causes brain damage. And that sounds like a little clickbaity. But what's actually physically happening is it begins to erode the myelin sheaths of your neurons. This is what your brain is made of, right? And so it deteriorates over time. It's not, it might deteriorate over time. It 100% will deteriorate over time. And it's somebody at my age, it's like, listen, I need to slow that process down anyway. I can't remember what happened last week, let alone, what I'm saying. Anyway, so you're kind of the tone of your question is like, how can we lead optimal lives if we are choosing to compromise our mental capacity, our physical capacity? It's like,
Mhm.
listen, we're competing with younger people,
Yeah.
right? And if you want to compete for longer, you need a cutting edge. And so being alcohol free is that. So if that's the angle you want to take, if that's like the platform you want to stand and that's your reasoning for quitting, that's cool. But in terms of moderation, come up with a plan for yourself, run the experiment. If you can't stick to your own plan, that's problematic. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And inevitably you end up feeling worse, don't you? Because
Yeah.
you're going to fail and then you feel like a failure and
Mm. You know
then that
what's even worse about that is if you fail, make a mistake, right? You listen. There are no mistakes, only lesson, and a lesson is
yes,
repeated until we
absolutely, I agree with
to
that,
change
yeah.
the behavior. But we take it personally. We
Mhm.
assign a moral meaning to ourselves. If I can't do what I say I'm going to do, that must mean that there's something wrong with me. We take it like personally, and nobody, and it doesn't even have to come from somebody else. We do it to ourselves. right? We are more critical of ourselves typically than anybody else is. And so self esteem is having esteem for yourself, that you're going to keep your own word to yourself. And if you constantly break your own word to yourself, you begin to feel all the negative feelings that causes one to want to self soothe. And alcohol is something that's kind of a guaranteed, it's a cause and effect issue. The cause is when you drink it, you feel differently. There is a price tag to pay for every sort of self-soothing mechanism. My thinking is I would prefer to pay the price up front. So I'll just give you an example. So if you drink alcohol, you pay the price later in terms of hangover, lack of sleep, blotchy skin, bloat, more stress. The list goes on and on. But there's another tool that's so underutilized, which is exercise, let's say. But exercise causes the price you pay up front in terms of pain and discomfort, whatever you associate exercise with. You pay the price up front, but very rarely do people end an exercise. Like I come out of yoga class and be like, wow, I'm so disappointed I did that. Or you go for a run and you come home and you're like, well, that was a waste of time. Like people don't typically feel that way. There's this idea that mood follows action. And when we take action, especially physical action, that's a very great way to moderate your feelings. That's a good tool for emotion management. That's just one of the things. So yeah, but there's probably a lot in that too. But I just so,
It's so true, and it's finding the healthier alternatives, isn't it, to drinking effectively? So what can give you that dopamine hit and that serotonin and everything else, which will enable you to get the high and manage the emotions better and be more present and all of that good stuff without reaching for a drink. So you make a really good point, and exercise is one of those things. But
yeah,
also, what you said about self-esteem, really just being able to keep those promises to yourself, and what you say you're going to do, you actually do. That's actually what builds confidence and everything,
yeah,
self-esteem and everything else. And few people realize that, I think, to the point that you made, that you take it personally and you think, I'm a failure, I haven't done something. But actually, the more you can do things that you say you're going to do, the more confidence you build, the
yeah,
identity grows, the self-esteem grows,
yeah,
and actually life gets better. And
yeah,
there's not a correlation there, I don't think, for many people, that by ditching alcohol, that allows you to do that more easily, because you can keep those promises to yourself, because you haven't got that other thing telling you in your head you need to have a drink for everything and you can't not. So yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of social pressure to drink. It's kind of interesting. They say it's the only drug you have to explain why you're not doing it, right? Like here in the States, people will do marathons or some of those Tough Mudder events or Spartan events. At the end, they drink alcohol. We'll have like you go to the church picnic and there are kegs and wine, and the ladies get together and do bunco. It's a dice game here, and they call it drunko because there's always wine. It's like it seems like there's a lot of external pressure to drink unless you surround yourself with a community that is really focused on living a conscious life or consciously alcohol free.
Mm, yeah.
It's very easy to fall back into those ways.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that a couple of times, like the living a conscious life. And
Yeah.
why don't you explain what you mean by that? Because I, I,
So
I get what you're saying, but it'd be
yeah,
interesting to get your take on it.
it deserves an explanation. So I'll start from sort of the framework that probably most people can relate to, which is there's this idea I've heard in 12 step rooms that if it's hysterical, it's historical. And that means if you have a response that's disproportionate to the situation, if you overreact and you walk away and you're just like, what was that all about? Or somebody blows up on you if somebody gets triggered. People are talking about getting triggered all the time now. And so what that means is that there's some unresolved emotion, right? So how do we, it's just a sign, right? Where did it come from? And so when we can go back and do some self-examination, we typically can uncover that there was some pain or wound in our childhood, where one of the three core wounds is like, I'm not lovable because I'm too much or not enough, I'm not worthy, or I'm alone. That's another core wound. And so when we're operating from these places, we tend to overreact in real life. And so it's so important to be able to understand, so you can have that awareness of, why am I like this? And so you know this about yourself. Well, how do I live consciously? So living consciously is about, when I feel triggered, to pause and do some self-examination or take a break. Like if I'm talking to someone, this happened recently. I was actually on a women's, are you familiar with She Recovers at all? It's like an alternative. There's an alternative to 12 step. It's a women's group. And so I was sitting on a meeting and there was somebody that was bashing 12 step, which kind of annoys me. Out of compassion, mostly because I was like, oh, this woman has a misunderstanding. I would love to talk about that at some point.
Yeah.
This woman had this misunderstanding, and she was perpetuating some myths, let's say, some misconceptions and myths. And I felt very uncomfortable. But I have been practicing conscious reactions, let's say, for a long time. So for me, it's like I pause. I was like, what is it in me that is being affected? Why am I reacting to this? Like, what's inside of me that is feeling like threatened or scared? Usually it boils down to some sort of fear, And then I've been doing this so long that I was like, oh, I have these fears. I'm afraid that someone is gonna, I'm a rescuer. I've tried to be a helper now, but my instinct is to be a rescuer. So to watch somebody suffer, I care about people. So to watch somebody suffer is painful for me. So I go through I was like, oh, you're okay. It's fine. I trust the process, trust the community, that this person will find their way. It's not my job to rescue everybody. I'm okay. I have to like reassure myself. It's okay. It's okay. Everyone's going through their process. It's not my job to rescue everybody. So I know myself. I did a lot of work and I know myself. So when I get triggered, I have to slow down and go through this process of what's going on with me and how do I regulate and how do I let go of what's not mine? Yeah, it's not mine. Nobody asked me for my opinion. This woman, she was just sharing her feelings. She didn't ask me for help, right? That's another thing I've learned. It's like, I only help people who ask for it. If somebody is sharing something with me, I can pause and say, did you want feedback? Did you just want a safe place to vent? How can I best support you right now? Because the first time somebody did that for me, I was shocked. I actually didn't know I had a choice. Right. I didn't realize that there was an option, but I had a safe person that was like, did you just want a bit or do you want some feedback? I kind of was hearing some things that might help you change your perspective. And I found that to be super helpful. So I actually really appreciate people who are willing to be honest, but compassionate, right? Honesty without compassion is cruelty. I'm not trying to be confrontational, but I will invite somebody to, I'll offer feedback if they want it, but that I don't give advice without permission
Mm.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I forgot what the question was again. I keep doing that. I just feel like there's so much to all of this, right? It's not
There's so many
straightforward.
layers. Mm.
It's not straightforward. Everybody's different.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many layers. And I think that was a good quote, though. If it's hysterical, it's historical, because a lot of people react to things and then check themselves or feel really guilty afterwards because they're like, why did I overreact? Or why did I say it like that? And actually, again, being able to pause and be conscious, because we run 95% of our day is running on subconscious, and
Yeah.
we have to actually step out of that and be conscious and be present and be aware of what's going on and
Yeah.
try not to let your subconscious take over. But that's
Yeah.
so hard for people, and you only get certain moments, I think, in the day where you can truly sort of ground yourself and be conscious. But
Yeah.
thinking about that and pausing, it's a little bit like one of the tools that we use, which is halt. So if you are about to reach for a drink, then you pause and you think, am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired? And you actually make that conscious connection before. By the time you've done that, you probably think, oh, actually, no, I need this. This is the feeling I'm trying to create. So that's what I need, as opposed to, I don't really need the drink, I need this. And so that, what you've just described, is a great way of pausing from an emotional perspective, which
I
is
don't know
really,
if you know this, but halt kind of came out of the 12-step world.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the cliches.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a bit about 12 steps, so why don't we go on to your book? So I think it's probably a good segue into your book, and that's coming out soon. So what?
Yeah, I'm gonna come hell or high water. I'm going to publish this thing this year. I just keep running into, I keep putting it down. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I don't need to do this. And then something happens and I'm like, okay, I get it. I'll finish the book. So it's called The 12-Step Guide for Skeptics.
Mm.
And really, it's when I do podcasts, I'll talk about the four big obstacles, which is the word alcoholic, the idea that 12 step is religious, the idea of powerlessness, what it really refers to. And the final component is the people. It's in 12 step rooms, they call it the fellowship, and it's the community. It's the 12 steps and the community are two separate things that are intended to work together. But what I will say is that the people is made up of people who are recovering from mental illness, myself included. I humbly admit I'm one of those. I was one of those people. And so there's some who are recovered in those communities, and there are people who are recovering. So the recovering people are still like highly triggered, they can be problematic. I'll, I'll say, I'll say some of them are problematic. And so the whole purpose of the book is to provide context and perspective to those ideas so they don't have to be obstacles, because the hill I will die on is the 12-step process is a worthy endeavor for anybody. Right. It doesn't matter if the addiction is on a spectrum, right? There's people that are like, can take it or leave it, but it's still problematic to the people who are drinking themselves to death, right? It's a spectrum. And so even if you're on the end of like, I can kind of take it or leave it, or go to therapy to quit, or have a spontaneous recovery, I would still argue that the 12-step process is a worthy endeavor because it's so transformative. Right. And on face value, you read the 12 steps, it's like, I don't get it. There is a lot of context behind it to make it meaningful. Right. People say eat fruits and vegetables and exercise. Okay. That doesn't tell me anything. Right. That doesn't explain the why or the how or how much or when, or so there's a lot of instruction. So if it's okay, I'll just kind of break
Yeah, of
down.
course.
Yeah. So the first barrier to entry is admitting you're an alcoholic. And a lot of people see that as a shame label. And they're like, I'm not going to use that word. But almost like this new wave of sobriety, people are like, I'm not going to use that word. It actually reinforces the idea that the word is shameful. Right. And in my mind, the word alcoholic means, especially for somebody in recovery, that is a badge of honor. That is somebody who has decided to step up and take responsibility for their actions in their life and to regain control. Right. And it also means that they are dedicated to a life of helping others. It's a life of service. Right. And so there's a lot, and it's an identifier. Oh, these are my people. Right. They get my kind of crazy. I belong here. Like, you all get me. Right. Like, I don't think like normal people do. I have a new normal in this world. So that's what it means to me. It's totally different. Right. It's a place of people. Not all meetings are the same, which is the people part. But when you find the right group and you feel safe, these people, and that's probably why at 29, 30 years sober, I'm still very interested in this topic, because it's become a way of life, because the community has been so amazing to me. Right. That's kind of the first hurdle someone has to, that barrier to entry is this idea. How do you wrestle with this idea of alcoholic?
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
And
But
there is such
anyway,
a stigma around sobriety,
yeah.
regardless of whether you stop drinking or you haven't stopped drinking. And I wasn't as bad as that person, or I didn't used to drink as much as that person. When you do stop, it's really bizarre, actually, that whole.
It's messy.
It is. It is.
Messy.
And it is, to your point, it stops people taking control and
Yeah.
doing what they need to do, because
Yeah.
of all the associations or connotations that come from what society says around
Yeah.
it all.
Yeah. And what I think is great is there are a lot of other alternatives now who don't use that terminology. And if that's where you're at, then that's fine too. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's really okay. I'm not trying to say that you have to identify as an alcoholic. To
No, and
me,
I use the term grey area drinker, and that's a spectrum, as you say. You could be
yeah,
if you're not teetotal and you've not hit like absolute rock bottom
yeah,
dealing rehab, you're a grey area drinker. So that's like a huge 1 to 10, right?
yeah, yeah. And so the whole tenet of the 12-step program is take what you like and leave the rest.
Yeah.
So if
Mm.
that's a word that doesn't work for you, leave it. It's fine. Maybe the people will agree with you, but we'll circle back to that. But the other barrier to entry is people think it's a religious program. And very early, and listen, I grew up in the Christian church and had a fair amount of religious trauma. And I was like, if this is religious, I can't do it. And this gal was like, oh, no, 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 that's not what it is.
Mm.
She's like, if you have a problem with God, you probably have a problem with somebody else's God. So let's redefine it to something that makes sense to you, like right off the bat. And actually, that's step two. So if you just can get past step one and get to step two, we take care of that. It's not a religious program. It was founded in Christianity. So I'm not going to lie, if you have a Christian background, it'll be easier for you, right? But I have gone to 12-step meetings that were atheist based, which was an interesting meeting to go to. Anyway, what they're saying in the wisdom of the 12 steps, they said, as you understand it, right? And so there is a lot of patriarchal language. It is Christian based, but it's a take what you like, leave the rest. And that's the kind of the constant refrain that I have. It's like, just drop that. That's if that doesn't work for you, just drop it, but keep going. Right. My thing is do the steps in order and finish them with somebody who's been through it before,
Yeah.
because it makes more sense. You kind of have to do it with somebody else. And then the other really big thing that people get really hung up on is this idea of powerlessness. And they read the steps and they go, powerless over alcohol, my life is unmanageable. And they go, I'm not powerless. I can't do this. And the idea is that they're leaving off two very significant words: over alcohol. Powerless over alcohol, not over everything,
Mm.
right? And that's a huge difference. That is a huge change in perspective. That is a huge misconception. People get so hung up on this idea of powerless over alcohol that they're like, I'm not powerless, which I would agree. You are not powerless. You have to take responsibility for yourself if you are going to change, right? And I would argue that everybody is powerless over alcohol to some extent, because it's literally, you can't consume alcohol and experience the cascade of chemical reactions that happen within your body and be like, I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to do that. Like, that's impossible. You ingest alcohol, there will be, it's cause and effect, right? So it's from a scientific point of view that it's, once you consume it, you're powerless to stop the effects.
Yeah, and it's an interesting concept, and fundamentally, alcohol is an addictive substance, so anyone can become addicted to it, right? So you're absolutely right. You're going to want more if you, and depending on how many years you've been drinking, that's absolutely the case. And when you talk about powerless over alcohol, the number of clients and people that I've spoken to who just say, "Why is it I can control everything in my life, and this is the one thing I can't?" And so that that makes sense. It's a
Yeah.
challenge, but it's because alcohol is addictive. So
Because it's addictive.
yeah.
Yeah. No real mystery there.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
And
the
then the
last
fourth,
one,
yeah, final one.
yeah, the last one is the people.
Mm.
And what I would say to that is, I have met some amazing people. People get up and share, and they stay sober for years, and they share for years, and they get really good. I have been in rooms where I laugh and cry within one share. People have become such great speakers, and they're talking from the heart. And when someone speaks from the heart, it really crosses all barriers. We feel that. When I share about something that happened to me that I feel vulnerable about, you said it sounds like when I speak, it sounds like it have, it's because I can still feel it, right? I'm speaking from the heart. And so that's what translates, I feel like. And so The community, the fellowship has been magical for me, but I have very strong boundaries, right? Like, and I know the difference between someone sharing their experience from somebody who's speaking for the organization as a whole, right? So if you go to aa.org and read, and if you read the book Alcoholics Anonymous, or if you read the book, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, that's the source, right? And so what happens, people go to meetings and the people will say things that are not necessarily in alignment with the organization. But what is happening is they're working stuff out. Everybody is working their stuff out. And so not to take everything that people say at face value, right? It's, if you want to know if they are right or wrong, just go back to the literature. I always direct people back to the literature. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what is a requirement for membership, which is really, you don't even have to stop drinking. It's just a desire to quit. That's all that's required. It's encouraged that you don't show up loaded. But do you know what I mean? It's like everything else is a suggestion. It's very much take what you like, leave the rest. But I've heard many people say, oh, I left the program because this group or the sponsor or somebody said something to me, or a group, a group in itself can be very unhealthy. I've heard horror stories about groups that were very unhealthy. Like minds attract each other, right? Like attracts like, and like-minded people congregate. So if you find that people are mentally ill, for lack of a better word, find another meeting. They do not represent the organization as a whole, right? And so again, my initial premise is that the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor, and to do the steps in order, like you don't necessarily have to go to meetings in order to practice the 12 steps. If it's nice to do it with a person, it's nice to go to meetings. Listen, I love going to meetings because that's where all my friends were at. I wanted to be of service. And so there were people there that needed help. And I felt like all of my experiences weren't for nothing. Everything that I went through was a value to the person I was sharing. I could be like, oh my God, me too. I used to wake up with strangers. I drank more than I wanted to. I said things I didn't mean. And as I gave compassion to others, I found compassion for myself, because there's this idea that you can't escape the same measuring stick that you judge others by. And as I gave compassion to others for their need to self-soothe and to heal, I found it for myself too. So it was just a really healing experience for me. And that's what kept me coming back and staying in this realm of recovery. And I see a lot of people in the recovery space that are newly sober, that I think is so important, because people look at me at 29 years sober and they're like, she's not going to relate. They want to talk to somebody that has a few years sober. They're like, she's going to understand how I feel. So, but then there's other people that are like, oh my God, how did you raise your kids? How did you stay married for 29 years? I met my husband like right when I got sober. But people are going to want to. So I feel like everybody's experience is valuable. We all need to show up in the space,
Yeah.
and meet people where they're at. And some people just don't relate to me, but some people do. I'm really good at what I do, and some people are attracted to that. So I'm here for it.
So who would you say the book's aimed at?
That's a tricky one. It really is for people who have tried this 12 steps and left, or who are considering it for a variety of people get encouraged to go to 12 steps, right? And so if someone is being encouraged, it would be a nice book to say, hey, here's a book that will give you some parameters. You can get through this. You can get past these barriers to gain the benefits of the program. There's so many benefits, right? So I want people to be able to access the benefits without getting hung up on the obstacles. So I almost feel like it's for the 12-step people who want to encourage somebody to go, but also somebody who is considering that they need to know how to do it safely. There's a safe way to go through it, a productive, safe way to go through it. So fingers crossed. I hope it helps a whole bunch of people.
Yeah. So when is it out, or this year? We'll say this year, and people can
Yeah,
look out
I'm
for it.
going to say this year. So I've written the manuscript and had a couple of revisions, and then you send it to a developmental editor, and then they send it back, and you got to make your changes, and it's got to go to copy editor. So that's a painfully slow process for me.
Best of luck with it. So yeah, watch this space. Fantastic.
Yeah, I do have Sober Life School, which
Yeah, I
will,
was about to
that's sort
ask
of,
you about that.
yeah, that's my hub. So it has links to the podcast, my classes, and I'll have announcements for the book there as well.
Brilliant. So do you want to talk about Sober Life School, maybe your hypnosis as well?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. Hypnosis is a part of my coaching practice because what we're really trying to do is get to root cause. You can notice all the things like, oh, I overreact here. I'm not able to keep my commitment to myself, or I keep relapsing. Why is that happening? And so my belief is that it's not really even a belief. It's just I stand on scientific evidence that all your beliefs reside in your subconscious mind. We make decisions emotionally and justify logically. So, what are these subconscious emotions that we're dissociated from? And hypnosis is a practice of getting into that theta brainwave state. All hypnosis is self hypnosis. This isn't about mind control or anything. It's about relaxing your mind enough to where you can get to those deep rooted subconscious beliefs and begin to reframe those beliefs from the perspective of where did they get established in the first place. When was I a child? That when did I come to the conclusion that it was not safe to feel my feelings? When did I decide that I was not lovable? When did I decide that I wasn't worthy, or that I'm alone and I have to figure it out for myself? And going back to those places and reframing those experiences so that those feelings get processed to resolution, right? At a really deep level,
Mm.
right? They say in typical therapy, it takes about 18 sessions before somebody feels safe enough to where the therapist and the client come together for somebody to feel safe, right? But in hypnosis, you can reach those deep places in the first session. So I think it's an important part of recovery because alcohol is really just a symptom of a deeper issue.
Mm.
Right. And so in my mind, like I'm a girl of efficiency. Let's just be efficient. Let me save you some money. Let's just get to root cause and resolve these things at root cause so that you can be conscious about how do you want to feel? What actions do you want to take that are going to lead you to the results that you want? We're all chasing experiences,
Mm.
right? We all think that we're going to be better in the having of whatever our goal is.
Yeah.
So that's my process, and I outline it at Sober Life School. I outline my coaching practice that comes with the self-esteem class, and it comes with like a 30-day boot camp. It's a bargain.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'll put all the details to Sober Life School on the in the show notes, and yeah, check it out. So again, who joins Sober Life School?
So when I work one-on-one with somebody, it's typically professional women. I don't take insurance, and I don't know what it's like there, but I typically work with professional women who just need the privacy and support, and they need an alternative to traditional, like I love, as much as I love 12 step, it's not a fit for everybody. I typically work with doctors and lawyers and professional executives who really don't have the time. They have families, they have really high pressure jobs, and they need some privacy to be able to work through their issues. So I have the benefit of having the 12 step experience and a variety of tools to help somebody just reach their goals in a more private setting. So
Brilliant, brilliant. No, that's fantastic. And have you seen a change in the past 30 years when it comes to, because we talked earlier about it still being ingrained in our society, it's still being the only drug you have to justify not
yeah.
taking. Have you seen any change in those 30 years?
I have seen, we were talking about the new wave of sobriety that's come out. The idea of dry January, there's sober October, no booze November. It's really leaking into mainstream conversation. Mental health in general, especially after COVID, mental health is kind of on the forefront. And so I think people are more willing to talk about how do we maintain our mental health, emotion management, reduce our stress. And people are way more willing to talk about things like stress management, that it all sort of feeds into the same thing, right? Let's find healthier ways of coping with stress. So I have seen a change, and there's new treatments. There's a lot of psychedelic assisted therapies that are coming out to address those really tough cases of like severe addictions, drug addictions, alcohol addiction.
Mm.
So I feel like the whole landscape is changing, and there's a lot of promising healing modalities that are helping us all sort of manage the stress of these modern times.
Well, thank you. And as you know, I ask all my guests, what does thriving alcohol-free mean to you? I'd love to hear your answer.
That's so good. I love, that's the whole point, is to thrive, right? The idea that, to me, it's actually possible. We need to believe, like, hope is hearing other people's experiences. That's the acronym for hope. And the idea is that we can thrive. We actually, you and I know people who have overcome this obstacle and have flourished on the other end. Like, this is the gateway to everything. They say that everything, what's that saying, that all your dreams are in the cave you fear to enter?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. The other
y'all, if
side
you
of
just get
fear.
past,
Yeah,
yeah, you
yeah,
just get past this and all things are possible.
yeah,
That's what's exciting to me.
yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, so is there any final words of wisdom? You've come up with so many, but any final one you want to leave the listener with?
Yeah, I would just say take it one day at a time. Like, we don't have to solve all of our problems today. Like, set super small goals in the beginning and just be gentle with yourself, empathy, be compassionate towards yourself. And that is the beginning.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you, just so that everyone's aware?
Yeah, soberlifeschool.com is probably the easiest place to find me. I spend a lot of time on social media at Arlina Allen or at ODAT podcast on Instagram. That's where I spend most of my time.
Well, thank you so much for being such an amazing guest and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Arlina. It was a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing so wonderfully. And I do encourage you, if any of that resonated, or if you thought actually it might be a time for me to reassess where I am on when it comes to alcohol and what I want to do next, then there are lots of resources out there. And of course, feel free to get in touch with me. As I said, it might be worth going on to the Thrive Alcohol Free website and seeing if there's anything on there that could be helpful. I do offer complimentary 20-minute clarity calls for people if you just want to have a chat and see where you are and see where I can help you along the way. Okay, so I do hope you have a wonderful week, and I think remember to breathe. That was on my mind today. I think breathing is so important and it really helps with your nervous system and to just regulate your nervous system. So if you're feeling anxious or you're feeling a little bit stressed this week or just feeling like you're not quite yourself, I find that breathing deeply helps, and there are lots of different techniques. You could do box breathing where you imagine there's a box and you breathe in for 4, hold for 4 as you go along the box, breathe out for 4 and then hold for 4 again. So I think we can let things get to us quite quickly, but breathing helps. So to this week, just think about that and breathe. Okay, well, again, it was lovely to speak to Arlina. I hope you got something out of it. Feel free to get in touch. I'll leave her details on the show notes and I will see you on the next episode. Okay, take care. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have my group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. All the links are in the show notes. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.